The text came in at 11:47 on a Tuesday night. 3 words, nothing else. Dad, blue umbrella. I was sitting in my recliner with the television on mute, a mug of cold coffee on the side table, when my phone buzzed against the wood. I almost didn't look. At 63, most late-night texts are wrong numbers or spam, but something made me pick it up. I read the words twice. My hands went cold before my mind caught up with why blue umbrella. Those 2 words hadn't been spoken between my daughter and me in 11 years. Not since she was 19 years old and scared of a boyfriend who used to grab her by the arm hard enough to leave marks. Back then, we built a code, a simple phrase she could send me if she was ever in trouble and couldn't say it out loud. If she ever texted those words, it meant one thing: come now. Don't ask questions, just come. I stood up so fast the coffee mug tipped over and spilled across the carpet. I didn't care. I was already reaching for my truck keys. My name is Walter Reyes. I spent 31 years as a machinist at a plant outside Dayton, Ohio, before my knees gave out and I took early retirement. My wife, Carol, passed 4 years ago from cancer. Since then, it's been me, this house, and a garden I never really wanted to keep but couldn't bring myself to let die because she planted it, and my daughter, Emily, 30 years old now, married for the last 3 years to a man named Grant Whitfield. Grant came from money. Real estate money, the kind that gets passed down instead of earned. He was polite to my face, always shook my hand a little too firm, always called me sir, in a way that felt more like a performance than respect. Emily had been so happy when they got engaged. I told myself my discomfort around him was just an old man's stubbornness, a father who didn't want to let go. I told myself a lot of things over the last 3 years that I didn't fully believe. The rain had started sometime after 10. By the time I pulled out of my driveway, it was coming down hard enough that my wipers could barely keep up. Emily and Grant lived 40 minutes away, in a gated neighborhood with brick houses and manicured lawns, the kind of place where the grass looks like it's ashamed to grow past 2 inches. I gripped the wheel and forced myself to breathe. Blue umbrella. She hadn't used those words since she was a teenager. Why now? Why, after 3 years of a marriage she swore was fine every single time I asked? I thought back to the last time I saw her, 2 weeks earlier. At a Sunday dinner Grant's mother had insisted on hosting. Emily had smiled the whole night, laughed at Grant's jokes, poured wine for his business partners. But I remembered something now that I hadn't let myself think about at the time. She'd worn long sleeves in August. I told myself it was fashion. I told myself a lot of things. My phone buzzed again on the passenger seat. I glanced down at a red light, another text from Emily. He doesn't know I sent this. Please hurry. My jaw tightened. I pressed the gas the second the light turned green. The guard at the entrance gate recognized my truck from past visits and waved me through without slowing me down to check in, which I was grateful for, because I don't know if my voice would have worked right if he'd asked me anything. Their house sat at the end of a cul-de-sac, brick and white columns, a porch light glowing yellow through the rain. Grant's car was in the driveway. Emily's was not. That detail hit me harder than anything else. Her car was gone. I parked crooked at the curb and walked up to the front door fast, my knees screaming at me the way they always did in wet weather, but I didn't slow down. I knocked twice, hard. Grant opened the door in a gray t-shirt and sweatpants, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He blinked at me like he was trying to remember if we had plans. "Walter," he said, "it's late, everything okay?" I studied his face, calm, almost too calm for a man whose wife had apparently vanished into a rainstorm at midnight. "Where's Emily?" I said. Not a question, a demand. He took a slow sip from his glass. "She went to her sister's. Needed some space, I guess." "Women, huh? Emily doesn't have a sister." I kept my face still. 31 years on a factory floor teaches a man how to keep his face still even when something inside him is screaming. "Which sister?" I said. Something flickered behind his eyes. A half second of recalculation. Then he smiled, easy and practiced. "You know how she gets, dramatic. I'm sure she'll call you in the morning." He started to close the door. "Get home safe, Walter. Roads are bad tonight." I put my hand flat against the door before it could shut. "I'm going to need you to actually answer my question, son." The word son came out sharper than I meant it to. Grant's smile thinned at the edges. For 1 second, just one, I saw something underneath the polish. Something that reminded me of every cornered animal I'd ever seen at the plant when a machine jammed and a man's hand got too close. "She's fine," he said, his voice dropping lower. "You should go home. I didn't move. Rain ran down the back of my collar, soaking through my flannel shirt. But I stood there and looked at this man who had my daughter's ring on his finger, and my daughter's last name attached to his, and I made a decision that would change everything that came after. I'm going to call her, I said. Right now. In front of you. I pulled out my phone before he could respond. I dialed Emily's number. It rang twice, then went to voicemail. My stomach dropped. I tried again. Straight to voicemail this time. Someone had turned the phone off, or someone had taken it away from her. Grant watched me with his arms crossed now, that easy smile completely gone. You should trust your daughter's decisions, Walter, he said quietly. She's a grown woman. She sent me a message, I said. 2 words that mean she's in trouble. She has meant them since she was 19 years old, and some other man put his hands on her the wrong way. For the first time that night, Grant's face went pale. I don't know what you're talking about, he said, but his voice had lost its smoothness. I stepped back off the porch into the rain and looked at him standing in the doorway, dry and comfortable, while somewhere out in this storm my daughter was hiding, scared enough to reach back 11 years for a code we built when she was a teenager who trusted her father to come running. I'm going to find her, I told him, and when I do, you and I are going to have a longer conversation. I turned and walked back to my truck. Behind me, I heard the front door shut, hard. Sitting in the driver's seat, soaked through, I stared at my phone. I had one more idea. Years ago, after Carol got sick, Emily had insisted on adding me to a family location app, so I could keep track of appointments and she could keep track of me. An old joke between us about who was really looking after who. I opened the app with shaking fingers. A small blue dot appeared on the map, sitting still, 11 miles away, at a gas station just off the highway. I put the truck in drive. Whatever 3 words she'd sent me, whatever had happened in that house tonight, I was not going to let my daughter face it alone. Not again. Not after promising her 11 years ago that if she ever needed me, I would come. I pressed the gas and drove into the storm toward that small blue dot, with no idea that what I would find at that gas station was only the very beginning of everything. Emily had been hiding from me for 3 long years. The gas station sat off the highway exit, one of those all-night places with flickering fluorescent lights and a faded sign advertising cheap coffee. I pulled in fast, tires splashing through standing water, and scanned the lot until I saw her car parked crooked near the air pump, engine off, lights off. I ran to it, ignoring the ache in my knees. Emily was sitting in the driver's seat, both hands gripping the wheel like she was still driving even though the car hadn't moved. Her hair was wet. Her phone sat cracked on the passenger seat. I knocked on the window gently. She flinched hard before she saw my face, and then something in her shoulders just collapsed. She unlocked the door. I climbed into the passenger seat and didn't say anything at first. I just reached over and put my hand on top of hers the way I used to when she was small and scared of thunderstorms. I'm here, I said. Blue umbrella. I got here as fast as I could. She let out a breath that sounded like it had been trapped in her chest for years, not hours. I'm sorry, Dad, she whispered. I didn't know who else to call. I didn't know if you'd even remember. I will always remember, I said. Now tell me what happened. She wiped her face with the back of her sleeve, and that's when I saw it. A bruise, pale purple, just above her wrist, the exact spot her long sleeves had been covering at Sunday dinner 2 weeks earlier. My chest tightened with something I hadn't felt since the day the plant foreman told me a man on my line had lost 2 fingers to a press machine. A helpless, furious kind of dread. How long? I said quietly. How long has this been happening? Emily stared out the windshield at the rain streaking down the glass. It started small, about a year in. He'd grab my arm if I disagreed with him in front of people. Then it got worse. He always apologized after. Said he loved me too much. Said I made him crazy sometimes. She laughed, but it wasn't really a laugh. I told myself that was normal, passionate. I told myself a lot of things. Those words echoed the ones I'd been telling myself in the truck 20 minutes earlier, and it broke something open in me. Why didn't you tell me? I asked, though I already knew part of the answer. 'Cause you never liked him, she said, and I didn't want you to be right. We drove to a 24-hour diner a few miles down the road, the kind of place with cracked vinyl booths and a bell over the door. I bought her coffee she didn't drink and a plate of eggs she didn't touch, and I waited. The way you wait for a wounded animal to decide it's safe enough to come closer. Slowly, over the next hour, The whole story came out. Grant hadn't just been controlling with his hands. He'd been controlling with everything. Her bank account had been merged into his the first year of marriage. For simplicity, he'd said. Her job at the marketing firm had ended 8 months ago after he convinced her the commute was too much stress for her, that he made more than enough for both of them. Slowly, piece by piece, he had taken away every thread that connected her to a life outside of him, even me, especially me. He used to get quiet whenever I mentioned visiting you, Emily said. Not angry, just quiet, disappointed. Like I was choosing you over him every time I picked up the phone. She stared into her coffee cup. I started calling less because it was easier than watching his face change. I thought about the last 2 years. The canceled visits. The short phone calls that always seemed to end just as we were getting somewhere. The excuses. I had chalked it up to a young married woman building her own life, the way parents are supposed to expect and accept. I hadn't seen the pattern because I hadn't wanted to see it. What happened tonight? I asked. What was different? Emily's hands wrapped tighter around the coffee cup. I found something in his office. A folder he keeps locked, but he left it open on his laptop by accident. Financial documents, property transfers. My name was on some of them, Dad. Signatures that weren't mine. I sat up straighter. Forged signatures? She nodded slowly. There's a property, a rental building downtown, that got transferred into a shell company 2 months ago. My name is listed as a cosigner on the loan that financed it. I never signed anything. I've never even heard of that address. My machinist's mind, the part of me that spent 3 decades reading blueprints and catching errors before they became disasters, started working immediately. He's using your identity for something, I said. Something he doesn't want traced back to just him. When I asked him about it tonight, he grabbed my wrist so hard I thought he was going to break it. Her voice cracked for the first time. He told me if I ever brought it up again, or if I ever tried to leave, he'd make sure everyone believed I was the unstable one. He said his family has lawyers who could make me disappear from my own life without ever laying a hand on me again. The rage that moved through me in that moment was quiet, cold, the kind of anger that doesn't shout because it's too busy planning. He doesn't get to threaten you, I said. Not while I'm breathing. I got Emily a room at a small motel a few miles from the diner, paid in cash so there'd be no card trail leading Grant to her that night. I sat in a plastic chair by the window while she finally fell asleep on top of the covers, still in her damp clothes, exhaustion finally winning over fear. I didn't sleep. I sat there running numbers in my head, the way I used to calculate tolerances on the factory floor, except this time the variables were bruises and forged signatures and a man's threats. Around 3 in the morning, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Walter, this is Grant. I think we should talk like reasonable men before this gets out of hand. Emily isn't well. I only want to help her. I stared at those words for a long time. Not well. That was the beginning of the story he intended to tell everyone, I realized. Not a scared woman running from a man who hurt her, but an unstable wife whose worried husband was only trying to help. I didn't respond. Instead, I opened my contacts and found a name I hadn't called in almost 15 years. Dennis Okafor, an old friend from the plant whose son had become a family law attorney downtown, the kind who specialized in cases involving financial abuse and coercive control. I'd met him once at a barbecue years ago and remembered him being sharp, careful, the kind of man who listened twice as much as he talked. I sent Dennis a message asking if his son was still practicing and if he could see us as soon as possible. Emergency, I wrote. My daughter needs help. By the time the sun came up gray and thin through the motel curtains, Emily was awake, sitting cross-legged on the bed, staring at nothing. He's going to come looking for me, she said. He always finds a way to make things look like they're my fault. Not this time, I said. This time you have proof. A folder with your name forged onto documents you never signed is not something a good lawyer can spin into your instability. That's evidence of a crime, and it's evidence that helps you, not him. She looked at me, really looked at me, in a way she hadn't in a long while. You believe me, completely. No hesitation. I have never once doubted you in your entire life, I said. I'm only sorry it took me this long to see what was happening right in front of me. Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry. She nodded instead, slow and steady, like something inside her was starting to rebuild itself. We drove to Dennis's son's office that morning, a small practice above a bakery downtown, the smell of fresh bread following us up the narrow staircase. His name was Marcus Okafor, younger than I expected, with tired eyes that told me he'd seen more of this kind of story than any young man should have to see. He listened to Emily's account for nearly 2 hours, taking careful notes, asking questions gently but precisely. When she got to the part about the shell company and the forged loan documents, he set his pen down entirely. "Mrs. Whitfield," he said, "if what you're describing is accurate, and we can verify it, your husband may be looking at criminal fraud charges, not just a difficult divorce. This is bigger than a marriage falling apart. This could be a financial crime with your name attached to it without your consent." Emily went very still. "What does that mean for me?" Marcus leaned forward. "It means we need to move carefully and quickly, in that order. First, we protect you. Then we protect your name from whatever he's built with it. And then," he glanced at me, "we find out exactly how deep this goes and who else he might have done this to." I felt my jaw tighten at those last words. Who else he might have done this to? Something told me Emily wasn't going to be the only name on those forged documents. And something told me Grant Whitfield had built a much bigger house of cards than either of us understood yet. Standing right there in that small office above a bakery, with the smell of bread in the air, and my daughter's hand shaking in mine, Marcus spent the next hour walking us through what would need to happen. Emily would need to file for a temporary protective order, given the bruise and the threat Grant had made the night before. She would need to gather whatever financial records she could access before Grant realized she had legal representation. And most urgent of all, she needed somewhere safe to stay that he wouldn't think to look. "He knows my father's house," Emily said quietly. "It'll be the first place he checks." I hadn't thought that far ahead, but she was right. In 3 years of marriage, Grant had been to my house a dozen times. Holidays, birthdays. He knew the address, the layout, probably even which key sat under which flower pot, because I'd never had a reason to hide it from him. "Then we don't go there," I said. "Not yet." Marcus nodded. "I have a colleague who works with a local shelter that specializes in these situations. Confidential location, security, legal support on site. I can make a call." Emily's hands twisted together in her lap. "I don't want to hide like I did something wrong." "You didn't do anything wrong," I said, firmer than I meant to. "You are protecting yourself so you can fight this the right way, on your terms instead of his." She nodded slowly, though I could see the shame still sitting heavy on her shoulders. The kind of shame that isn't hers to carry, but that abusive men are experts at handing off anyway. The shelter was a plain brick building with no sign out front, tucked between a laundromat and a dentist's office, the kind of place designed to be forgettable to anyone who wasn't looking for it. A woman named Patrice checked Emily in, kind but businesslike, the practiced calm of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. I wasn't allowed to stay overnight, which I understood, but it didn't make leaving my daughter there any easier. Standing in the small intake room, I hugged her longer than I had in years. "Call me the second you need anything," I said. "Anything at all." "I will," she said into my shoulder. "Thank you for coming, Dad. For remembering." "I could never forget," I said. That code meant something to me too. It meant I promised you'd never have to face something like this alone. I'm not about to break that promise now. Driving home that night, the storm had cleared, and the roads were slick and quiet under a thin moon. My phone buzzed twice. 2 missed calls from Grant, then a text. "We need to talk, Walter, about what's mine." I gripped the wheel. What's mine? Not about Emily, not about my wife. About what's mine. Like she was property misplaced somewhere, and he intended to collect her. I got home a little after 9 and found Grant's car already parked outside my house. He was leaning against it, arms crossed, wearing a different shirt than the one he'd had on the night before, freshly showered, composed. The performance was back on. "Walter," he said, pushing off the car as I parked. "We need to have a real conversation." I didn't get out of the truck right away. I sat there for a moment, studying him through the windshield, this man who'd sat at my Thanksgiving table for 3 years, who'd shaken my hand at his own wedding and called me sir, who I now understood had been slowly dismantling my daughter's life piece by piece while smiling the whole time. I got out. I didn't invite him inside. "Say what you came to say," I told him. Standing in my own driveway, Grant's jaw tightened, just slightly. "Emily is going through something. A breakdown, maybe. I love her, Walter, I really do. But she's not thinking clearly. She's making accusations that could destroy both our reputations if this goes public. I want to get her help. Real help. Not whatever nonsense a shelter is filling her head with. She showed me the bruise on her wrist, I said quietly. I've seen bruises before, son. I spent 31 years around machines that caused them by accident. That one wasn't an accident. For a second, something dangerous flickered across his face, there and gone so fast I might have imagined it if I hadn't been watching for it. She's clumsy sometimes, he said, voice smooth again. You know how she is. I know exactly how she is, I said. Careful, precise. A woman who used to balance her own checkbook to the penny before you convinced her to hand over control of everything she owned. Grant's polite mask slipped another fraction. You don't know anything about our finances. I know about a rental property downtown, I said, watching his face carefully now, financed with a loan that has my daughter's forged signature on it. The silence that followed lasted only 3 or 4 seconds, but I watched every one of them land on his face like small explosions. Surprise, calculation, then something colder settling in underneath, something that looked less like a worried husband and more like a man doing math on how much damage had already been done and how much control he still had over the outcome. You have no idea what you're talking about, he said, but his voice had lost every ounce of its earlier smoothness. I know enough, I said, and I know a lawyer who knows a great deal more. This isn't just a marriage falling apart anymore, Grant. This is fraud with my daughter's name on it. That's not a family matter. That's a crime. Grant took a step closer, and for the first time I saw the man Emily had described to me the night before, the one underneath the charm, the one who grabbed wrists and made threats about lawyers who could erase people from their own lives. You should think very carefully before you let her drag both of you into something you can't walk back from, he said, voice low. My family has resources you can't imagine, Walter. Lawyers who can make this entire thing look like exactly what it is. An old man and his unstable daughter trying to shake down a good family for money. Nobody will believe either of you. I stepped closer too, close enough that he had to look up slightly to meet my eyes. You threatened my daughter last night, I said. And now you're standing in my driveway threatening me. I spent 3 decades working with men twice as dangerous as you. Men who lost fingers and still showed up the next morning, because that's what you do when you have something worth protecting. You have no idea what a man is willing to do to protect his family. Grant's expression cracked for just a moment, real fear flickering underneath the arrogance, before he composed himself and backed toward his car. This isn't over, he said, opening his door. No, I agreed. It isn't, but it's going to end the way I decide it ends, not the way you think it will. He drove off into the dark, taillights disappearing around the corner, and I stood in my driveway for a long time afterward, the cold night air settling into my bones. Inside, I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad, the same kind I used to use for shift reports at the plant, and I started writing down everything Emily had told me. Dates, details, the shell company, the rental property. Every piece I could remember, because I knew from 31 years of factory work that details forgotten today become impossible to recover tomorrow. Around 11, my phone rang. Marcus. Walter. I need you to sit down, he said, his voice tight in a way it hadn't been in his office earlier that day. I'm sitting, I said, though I wasn't. I pulled some preliminary records this evening, trying to get ahead of things before Grant's team can bury anything. The shell company Emily mentioned isn't just holding one property. He paused. It's connected to at least 4 others, all financed the same way, all with forged cosigner documents. My stomach tightened. 4 other properties. Whose names are on those? Marcus was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was careful in a way that told me whatever came next was going to change everything. Walter, one of the other names on those documents is your late wife's. I sat down hard in my kitchen chair, the legal pad slipping from my fingers onto the floor. Carol, I said. Carol's been gone 4 years. I know, Marcus said quietly. The loan associated with her name was taken out 8 months ago. The room around me seemed to tilt. My wife, 4 years in the ground, had somehow co-signed a loan for a rental property financed by a man I'd trusted with my daughter's future. How, I managed to say. How is that even possible? That, Marcus said, is exactly what we need to find out. And Walter, I don't think Grant did this alone. Someone helped him access records he shouldn't have had access to. Someone who knew details about your family that a husband wouldn't necessarily know on his own. I sat there in my silent kitchen, staring at the dropped legal pad on the floor. My dead wife's name somehow tangled into a fraud scheme I hadn't even known existed until that morning, and I understood, with a cold certainty settling into my chest, that this went far deeper than one bad marriage. Someone close to my family had betrayed us, and I intended to find out exactly who. I didn't sleep that night. By 7 the next morning, I was back at Marcus's office, the legal pad from my kitchen table tucked under my arm, my wife's name circled 3 times in blue ink like circling it. Enough would somehow explain how it got onto a fraud document 8 months ago. Marcus looked like he hadn't slept much either. He had a folder open on his desk, printouts spread out in neat rows. I stayed up cross-referencing everything, he said. I want to show you something, but I need you to stay calm. I buried my wife 4 years ago, I said. I've been calm about worse. He slid a document across the desk, a notarized signature page for the loan tied to Carol's name. I stared at the signature. It wasn't quite right, too rounded in the loops, but close enough to fool a bank teller glancing at it for 2 seconds. Whoever forged this had access to a real sample of her handwriting, Marcus said. Old cards, letters, something specific enough to copy the style. That's not a random detail Grant could have pulled from a public record. My mind went cold and still, the way it used to when a machine on the line started making a sound that meant something was about to break. Who would have had that kind of access? I said slowly. Marcus hesitated. I ran the notary's license number listed on this document. It traces back to a small office that shares a building with Whitfield Property Holdings. Grant's family company, he paused. The notary's name is Denise Park. Walter, she's listed in Emily's old employment records too. She worked as an office assistant at the marketing firm Emily used to work for before Emily left the job. I sat back slowly. Emily's old coworker, more than a coworker, Marcus said, sliding another paper across the desk. According to LinkedIn, Denise left that marketing firm 11 months ago to take a position at Whitfield Property Holdings as an executive assistant. To Grant. The pieces started arranging themselves into a shape I didn't want to see. Emily introduced them, I said quietly, more to myself than to Marcus. Before she even knew what kind of man she'd married, she probably introduced her husband to a friend from work. I drove straight to the shelter after leaving Marcus's office. Emily was sitting by the window in a small common room, wrapped in a blanket someone had given her, watching the parking lot like she expected Grant's car to appear at any moment. I sat down across from her and told her everything Marcus had found. I watched her face change as I spoke, confusion sliding slowly into horror. Denise, she whispered. She was my friend Dad, my actual friend. We got coffee every Friday for 2 years before I left that job. I introduced her to Grant at our engagement party because I thought she'd like him. I thought I was doing something nice. Her hands trembled around the edges of the blanket. She has my mother's handwriting samples, Emily continued, the horror deepening in her voice. I gave Denise a box of Mom's old recipe cards 2 years ago. She said she wanted to try baking Mom's banana bread recipe, that I'd told her about it so many times she wanted to taste it herself. I never got the box back. I never even thought about it again. I closed my eyes for a moment. My late wife's handwriting, given away in innocence, stolen and used to forge a woman back into a financial scheme 4 years after her funeral. They planned this together, Emily said, the pieces clicking into place on her end too. Denise didn't take that job by accident. She's been helping him build this the whole time. Maybe from the very beginning. Marcus called an emergency meeting that afternoon, and this time he brought someone else into the room, a woman named Detective Sarah Choi from the Financial Crimes Unit, a contact he'd worked with on similar cases before. Detective Choi listened to everything, her expression professionally unreadable, taking notes on a small tablet. This isn't the first complaint we've had about Whitfield Property Holdings, she said finally. We've had 2 anonymous tips over the past year about irregular loan activity, but nothing solid enough to move on. What you're bringing us today, direct testimony, documentation, a witness willing to testify. She looked at Emily. This could be exactly what we need to open a full investigation. Emily's hands were folded tightly in her lap. What happens to me if this goes forward? Will people think I was part of it? Based on what I'm seeing, Detective Choi said gently, you're a victim in this, not a suspect. Your name was used without your consent. same as your mother's. That's a very different position to be in than someone who profited knowingly. Relief moved across Emily's face, the first real relief I'd seen since that gas station the night before. I want to help however I can, Emily said. Whatever it takes to make this right. Detective Choi nodded. Then we're going to need everything. Every document, every conversation you remember, every detail about Grant's business dealings you've observed over the past 3 years, even things that seemed unimportant at the time. For the next 2 hours, Emily talked. Detective Choi asked precise, careful questions, and slowly a much larger picture began to form. Grant hadn't just forged 2 signatures. Over the past 18 months, he and Denise had used at least 6 different identities, some real, some partially fabricated, to secure loans totaling nearly $2 million, all funneled into shell companies that funded a lifestyle far beyond what his legitimate real estate income could support. Your husband has been living 2 lives, Mrs. Whitfield, Detective Choi said near the end of the meeting. The one he showed you, and one he's been building in the shadows for a long time. I don't think this started with you. I think you happened to marry into it. That evening, I drove home alone, my mind heavy with everything the day had uncovered. I sat at my kitchen table again, staring at Carol's photograph on the wall, the one from our 30th anniversary, her laughing at something just out of frame. I'm sorry, I said quietly to the empty kitchen. I'm sorry someone used your name for something so ugly. I'm going to make it right. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, but I recognized the area code immediately as belonging to Grant's family's law firm downtown. Mr. Reyes, this is Harold Whitfield, Grant's father. I believe there has been a serious misunderstanding, and I would like to discuss a resolution before this escalates further. Perhaps we could meet privately, without lawyers, as men who both want what's best for this family. I read the message twice, then a third time. Men who both want what's best for this family, as if Grant's family and mine were still somehow the same family, still bound by loyalty instead of broken by betrayal. I typed a short reply. Any further communication goes through my daughter's attorney. Nothing private, nothing off the record. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again, as if Harold Whitfield was drafting and deleting several responses before finally settling on one. You're making a mistake, Walter. My son's future is at stake, and so frankly is yours. Think about what a public scandal does to a family like Emily's. Think about her reputation. I stared at those words for a long moment, my jaw tight. Then I called Marcus and read him the entire message, word for word. That's not a peace offering, Marcus said immediately. That's a threat wrapped in polite language. Forward me screenshots of everything. This is exactly the kind of pattern that helps build a case, Walter. Families like the Whitfields have gotten away with this before, because people back down when threatened with reputation. We're not going to back down. No, I agreed, looking again at Carol's smiling photograph on the wall. We're not. I drove back to the shelter one more time that night, just to see Emily's face, just to make sure she knew she wasn't standing alone against a family. With more money and more lawyers than either of us had ever imagined. She met me in the small visiting room, looking exhausted but steadier than she had the night before, something like resolve beginning to settle into her expression where fear had been living for 3 years. Grant's father texted my dad tonight, I told her, tried to scare us into staying quiet. Emily's jaw tightened, and for the first time since that rainy gas station, I saw something in her that reminded me powerfully of her mother. A quiet, unshakable strength that had simply been buried under 3 years of fear. Let them try, she said. I'm done being quiet, Dad. I'm done being scared of what people will think. I want the truth out, whatever it costs. I reached across the small table and took her hand. Then that's exactly what we're going to get her, I said. The truth, all of it. No matter how far it goes, or how many people it embarrasses along the way. Outside the window, the night was clear for the first time in 2 days, stars visible above the parking lot lights, and for the first time since that 3-word text had changed everything, I let myself believe we were finally moving towards something that looked like justice. 3 months passed before the case against Grant Whitfield and Denise Park moved from investigation to indictment. 3 months of depositions, forensic accountants combing through shell companies, and Emily sitting across from detectives again and again, repeating her story until it stopped feeling like her own and started feeling like evidence. clean and solid and useful. She moved out of the shelter after 6 weeks into a small apartment near my house, close enough that I could check on her without hovering, far enough that she could rebuild something that belonged entirely to her. She got her old job back at the marketing firm, minus one particular coworker who would never work there or likely anywhere respectable again. I sat beside Emily on a hard wooden bench outside courtroom 4, waiting for the arraignment hearing to begin. She wore a gray blazer, her hair pulled back, her hands steady in her lap for the first time in months. "You don't have to go in with me," she said. "I know this isn't easy for you either. I promised you 11 years ago that if you ever needed me, I'd come," I said. "I intend to keep that promise for as long as I'm still breathing." She smiled, small but real, and squeezed my hand. Grant sat at the defense table in an expensive suit that couldn't quite disguise how much weight he'd lost in 3 months. His father seated stiffly behind him, no longer offering private resolutions or polite threats. Denise Park sat separately with her own attorney, refusing to look in Emily's direction even once. The prosecutor laid out the case methodically. Forged signatures, stolen identity documents, including a deceased woman's handwriting lifted from recipe cards given in friendship and betrayed in fraud. Nearly $2 million funneled through shell companies over 18 months. A pattern of coercive control used to keep one victim, Emily, silent and compliant while the scheme continued to grow. When the judge read the charges aloud, financial fraud, identity theft, forgery, and separately, on a probable cause basis, domestic assault, I felt Emily's hand tighten in mine at that last word, finally spoken out loud in a room full of people whose job was to take it seriously. Grant did not look at us once during the entire hearing. Afterward, standing on the courthouse steps in thin autumn sunlight, Emily let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for 3 months. "It's real now," she said. "It's not just something happening inside our family anymore. It's real, and it's on record, and nobody can tell me I imagined it." "You never imagined any of it," I said. "You survived it. There's a difference." Marcus joined us on the steps, his tie loosened, looking more relieved than triumphant. "This is just the beginning of the legal process, but today matters. Today the system agreed with what you already knew to be true." Detective Choi approached. A moment later, folder tucked under her arm. "I wanted you both to know something before it hits the news tonight," she said. The scope of the investigation grew. 3 other individuals have come forward this month with similar stories. People whose identities were used the same way yours was, Mrs. Whitfield. Your willingness to come forward first is part of the reason they felt safe enough to do the same. Emily went quiet for a moment, absorbing that. "Other people," she said softly. "I wasn't the only one." "You were the first one brave enough to speak," Detective Choi said. "That matters more than you know." The following Saturday, I drove out to the cemetery where Carol was buried, a place I hadn't visited as often as I should have over the past year, if I was honest with myself. Emily came with me, carrying a small bundle of yellow tulips, her mother's favorite. We knelt together at the headstone, the autumn wind cool against our faces. "I wanted you to know it's being made right, Mom," Emily said quietly, arranging the tulips at the base of the stone. "Somebody used your name for something ugly, but we caught it. We caught them." I put my hand on my daughter's shoulder, and for a long moment neither of us said anything else. The wind moved through the trees above us, and somewhere in the distance a dog barked, and the ordinary sounds of an ordinary Saturday continued on around a grief that had finally, after 4 years, found a small measure of closure. "I used to think I failed you both," I said eventually. "You, by not seeing what was happening in your marriage sooner. Your mother, by not protecting her name even after she was gone." Emily looked up at me. "You didn't fail either of us, Dad. You came the second I called. 11 years after we made that promise, you still remembered every word of it. That's not failure. That's the opposite of failure." I thought about the machinist I used to be, a man who spent 31 years learning that even the strongest systems eventually show cracks, and that the measure of a good worker wasn't whether the machine ever broke down, but whether he showed up fast enough to fix it before real damage was done. "I'm proud of you," I told her, "for finding your voice again, for refusing to stay quiet just because staying quiet would have been easier." A month later, I helped Emily move the last of her things into her new apartment, boxes of books and kitchenware, and a small collection of framed photographs she was only now comfortable displaying again. Among them, a photo of her mother laughing at that 30th anniversary party, the same photograph hanging in my kitchen. "I want to hang this by my front door," Emily said, holding the frame carefully. "So it's the first thing I see leaving and the last thing I see coming home, a reminder of where I come from, who I come from." I helped her hang it, level and steady, and stepped back to look at it with her. "Your mother would be proud of you too," I said. "Not just for surviving what happened, for everything that comes next, for rebuilding, on your own terms, exactly the life you want." Emily wrapped her arms around me in a hug that lasted a long moment, the kind of hug that says more than words ever could. "Thank you for teaching me that code all those years ago," she said into my shoulder, "for making sure I always had a way to reach you, no matter how much time passed, no matter how far things went wrong. Thank you for trusting me enough to use it," I said. Even after 11 years of silence, even when it must have felt impossible to ask for help. 6 months after that first text lit up my phone in the middle of a rainstorm, Grant Whitfield accepted a plea agreement that would keep him behind bars for the better part of a decade. Denise Park received a lesser sentence in exchange for testimony that helped convict him on the more serious charges. The 3 other victims who had come forward received restitution through assets seized from the shell companies, a small but meaningful measure of justice for lives that had been quietly stolen from underneath them. Emily built a new life in her new apartment, promoted at her job within the year, slowly reconnecting with friends she'd drifted from during her marriage, slowly becoming, in her own words, someone she recognized in the mirror again. I still sit in my recliner most evenings, television on mute, though these days the coffee stays in the mug instead of spilling across the carpet. Emily visits every Sunday now, sometimes with takeout, sometimes just to sit and talk, the kind of ordinary, unremarkable time together that I no longer take for granted. We never talk much about that night anymore. The rain, the gas station, the diner, where she finally told me everything. We don't need to. It lives quietly between us now, not as a wound, but as proof of something. Sometimes, late at night, my phone still buzzes with a message, and for half a second my heart still jumps the way it did that Tuesday night 11 months ago. But it's never trouble anymore. Usually it's just Emily, sending a photo of dinner she's cooking, or a joke she thinks I'll like, or sometimes nothing more than 3 simple words that have come to mean something entirely different now than they once did. "Love you, Dad." I always answer the same way, every single time. I'll always come, no matter what the words are. Because that's what the code was always really about. I've come to understand. Not the specific words themselves, but the promise underneath them. That no matter how much time passes, no matter how far apart life pulls a father and a daughter, there will always be a way back to each other if both people are willing to remember it.